seller or the company you're buying,
Yeah.
your own internal team? How do you deal with people that don't agree with you?
So this is something that I got better with over time. Originally, I love command and control. It makes the decisions a lot easier. But it doesn't scale. And especially as it gets more complex, you've got to surround yourself with people that will challenge you. And you've got to create the environment where they know it's not only acceptable to challenge you, but you expect it. And when they challenge you, say, "Oh, I'll always take your consideration on what you're saying," but it doesn't mean because you challenge me, I'm going to do what you tell me. On the acquisitions, it's particularly important because I never had more than a third of the company with me when I first moved on acquisitions. I cared about my business development lead, I cared about the engineering sponsor, and I cared about myself. And if the three of us were together, we just win. On the board, this is about track record, trust, and relationships. I expected the board to challenge me on it. And lesson 101, when you go in front of the board, first thing you do is show them what you're doing and why. Secondly, you show them the other alternatives you looked at and why you eliminated them. Third, you've already trained them on here's the 7 attributes of the golden rules, so you have all 7 written out and how it matches them. And then you let the board debate it, etc. But the board never turned me down on any acquisitions. Even some of them, they thought I was taking too much risk on, and sometimes they were right, sometimes they were wrong. But they knew, and they backed me all the time, that if I got 2 out of 3 right, that was better than anybody else did. In fact, if we had gotten even 50% right, they would have not blinked. The press will blink, by the way, and criticize when you miss, but that's just part of a portfolio management. As I got further along in leadership, and now at my startups, I love constructive friction. And I built that the last 10 years at Cisco. I like the give and take, and I expect it. It's just that once you've had that constructive friction, with decisions made, I expect everybody to line up behind the decision. If somebody's passive aggressive about you, just take them out of the company. I'd make an example on it. I'd warn people ahead of time on it, and I'd go over and put my arm around them much rougher than I did you in terms of the approach. But I never got confused with people with differing opinions versus a passive aggressive. I tell you I'm buying in, and I undermine the acquisition on it. And you do have to make examples when that occurs, unfortunately. But use all you wanted to. Next question. Yes, sir.
So I'm going to assume if John Chambers has a sleepless night, what's going through your mind?
Well, the ones I had the most trouble on the sleepless night is, and this is why I don't recommend it to a lot of CEOs, is I followed the health of every employee, their spouse, or their kids, and when there was a person in trouble, I got personally involved. I'd help get the right doctors, etc. I would literally call up a Dr. Cold Call who was doing experimental medicine in Maryland on an area that we have a terminally ill employee, and she couldn't get into the practice. There was no other alternatives. This was the last hope she had. And I'd call the doctor, and they always said yes. And then they'd also say, "You're the only CEO who ever called me," which helps too. And I also know once I did something, that'd be a payback in terms of helping them going to guest lecture or something like that. But it's sleepless nights when somebody is dying and you can't turn it around, especially if it's a kid. The real sleepless nights also are around when something bad happens, disaster strikes, and after you analyze it, you realize it's going to be hard and it's going to last a long time. .com bubble, 2001. And the numbers you would love. I was growing at 70% the first week in December, and the market was good, and my numbers for 10 years at Cisco, we could forecast plus or minus 1% for the year. Larry Carter and I, my CFO, we never missed a forecast. They called him 1 to 2 penny Larry. We were always over consensus by 1 to 2 pennies, and we never missed the range. The one quarter we were 1 penny below consensus, the stock dropped 20%. And so keeping me up when you see a trend coming that you know is going to be painful. And this is where Shimon Peres is right. Leadership is really lonely. Larry's always my wingman, but when it got tough, the CEO takes the heat. You just got to know that. Other things that would keep me up is when somebody broke our culture. They didn't treat customers right. And I will forgive mistakes and risk-taking. Lord knows I do. I do a lot myself. Just don't make the same mistake twice. But if you mistreated an employee or a customer, my patience on that was not good. You might think I raise my voice, yell. I've never yelled in my career at Cisco. But make sure everybody knew I had really high expectations and would hold them accountable. So those are the kind of things that keep me up at night. I don't revisit prior decisions much. I learn from them, but then I move on to it.
That's one more.
I'm sorry, she was next. She raised her hand.
Yeah.
I really got a lot out of your illustration of how the M&A skill set plays in the CEO office. I'm curious if
You want it to play that way. Now, your danger is if your CEO, she or he isn't playing it that way, you've got to make sure they do. Because otherwise you're out by yourself, even if you're the CFO.
Yeah, so that's a bit of the direction I want to go with the question, which is to say, can you be a great organic leader, you know, a leader of organic growth, like Steve Jobs, as well as a great leader of inorganic growth? You know, can a company, can one leader lead very, very well on both of those fronts, or have you seen in your experience, you know, what you pick your tool for growth and you stick with it?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a combination. It depends on the skill sets of the person and also their approach and who you have around them. So we did a very good job of organic growth in our products where we were already established. When we moved into new products, we'd acquire, get critical mass, and then it stayed organic after that. So was switching a organic growth or was it an acquired growth? For the first 3 or 4 years, it could be acquired, but after that, it was organic and building off. I had a really good engineering lead through much of this, Pankaj Patel, who also did that with me and very tolerant, because the ones that got most upset with the spin-ins were actually other engineers, and Pankaj would manage through that for me. I would argue in today's world you have to do both. Now there's something coming at the established companies that are going to be, I think, the next M&A, art of the M&A issue, which is, the premise is innovation is going to occur at a pace probably 3 to 4 times faster than it did before. The way I get that across to an audience is, I was on the Walmart board, we saw Amazon coming, and it was a well-run board and great company, but in 21 years they passed us in value. Fast forward another 5, 6 years. Tesla, GM saw it coming, they passed them in 14 years. Fast forward another couple of years. Uber, a way of purchasing automobiles, not ride sharing, not taxi cab replacements, displaced Tesla in 7 years. The next changes will occur in 4. So the speed of innovation is going to be unbelievably fast, and it's harder on today's leaders than it was mine, even though it was accelerating through this. As you think about how this occurs, the other phenomenon that has changed is the best and brightest at MIT or at Carnegie Mellon or at a Stanford would go into the existing companies or even into government. And today that's not happening. 80% of the talent coming out of these companies are going to startups. So if that's where the young talent is, best and brightest in the world, guess what? That's where almost all the innovation is going to come. And so the big companies are now going to have to learn how to not just acquire a startup, because if you acquire it, you're going to kill it if it's too early. But how do you strategically partner with one? How do you become dependent upon this? Also knowing there's a 50% chance of what I just did is going to fail, and I don't have control of it if I don't acquire it. If I acquire it, I'm going to kill it because it isn't far enough along yet. And that strategic partnering realm is starting to occur at a faster pace than I anticipated. So one of my startups, a company called Spark Cognition, 220 people, brilliant CEO, Amar Hussain, is partnering with Boeing, the most advanced aeronautical company in the world, 50-50 joint venture to design the next FAA architecture for unmanned aircraft. And Boeing's put the money in, and Spark Cognition's for the people. 50-50 joint venture. Another AI company that literally was stealth, still is in New York, did $1 million last year. They've already done $70 million this year. Companies are committing 10 to 15 million per year to a company that is $1 million just a year ago. So the next art that you all may be talking about is how do you work strategically. And I used to tell my startups, you're not a strategic partner. If you're $1 million in sales and somebody at Cisco tells you you're my strategic partner, I got to run rate of 40 billion. You're not my strategic partner. you are a transactional partner. I don't mean that arrogantly, but I don't want you to misthink. You have to earn your right each step of the way. Now I'm saying you very well may be my strategic partner. And that's a whole different element in terms of how you do things. And if you watch the most innovative large companies, they're suddenly strategically partnering in a very sincere way with the startups. And it's going to be probably even more of an art than the acquisitions, because at least in theory, when you do acquisitions, you control the assets and you can put on paper exactly what the win-win is on it. Next question.
There was one over here.
Sure, go ahead. You can move the mic and I'll answer.
So you really clearly laid out your framework when you were looking at acquisitions. So now that you're a venture capitalist, do you have a similar framework? How do you look at companies, and what's harder, acquisitions or venture capital investing?
I would argue acquisitions and venture capital investing are equally as hard, but I'm really not a venture capitalist the way you just described it. When I invest as a venture capitalist, you're investing, you're on a board, you coach them a little bit. When I invest with these companies, I am their strategic partner, I am the CEO's top coach, I'm their top critic. I don't invest in a company unless the CEO truly wants a business partner, and I know how to work to make sure they do. I make sure they're being very coachable. I make sure their culture's in line and their values in line with my side. And so I think increased dramatically the probability of that venture capital investment when I do get involved in it. So I think I raise the odds dramatically higher, and I'm not being, I hope, inappropriately confident on this. And when the VCs bring you to the deals and give you sweetheart deals on it, the CEOs do the same. It means they view your value there is there as well. So I would argue VC bet or a acquisition equally as hard, and the VCs who bet, obviously Series A or Angel take a higher risk than that. But if you are more Series B, which is where I usually come in, company's starting to scale, I match it up with the CEO, and then I match my skills with theirs, and I talk to them at least once a week, and often 4 or 5 times a week on issues of scaling. I think we raise the odds more. So we'll see if this works out as well as our M&A strategy did. I'm not sure, but the original question, I think they're equally as difficult, different skill sets. But what's happening today that may surprise you, and this you want to watch in the acquisitions that you all acquire, is that Cisco went public with $70 million in sales. Almost all of my Series B investments are way beyond that already, and I've only been going public with one company. And so what you're seeing is VCs who are very good at idea generation in very early stage companies are suddenly having to help a company go through major operational growth, and it might be as high as 200 million or 300 million or $1 billion before you even go public. The VCs often don't have that skills. And so that's where there's a void here that both I'm trying to fill, but also experience on how do you help them scale more and how do you reduce the failure rate on it. Does that make sense?
Thanks. So we're almost at the end of our time, and I want to make sure we have time to take a picture before the zombies come outside. Because we gave all of you a book, a copy of John's book. We also gave you a mask, and I think it would be kind of fun to take a picture with.
French, they're hard to get used to. Very creative.
It's an acquired taste. So we're going to take 2 short questions.
Here's the lesson on communications. Is you never say the last question or 2 questions. Because if you don't get a good question to end on, you don't end on that question. So we have a couple more questions, and I will summarize on the one that gives me the best chance to wrap up. So it's the first one. I'm going to summarize the first one. This one, this is no pressure. I'm going to get another one. If I go to a third one, and it's just getting that down.
Start with the end in mind. I gotta get that right.
Thank you. Everybody else, my sense of humor. I think it's pretty good. Shannon would tell you she's not sure.
So you mentioned how important culture is. To sort of, on the spectrum of corporate cultures, on one side we have even a genius like Steve Jobs, who was known to flay the skin off of people in meetings and so on. And on the other side, there was the old Hewlett-Packard style. So my own listing, and I want to invite your comment, I convey a zero tolerance to all my managers and executives about humiliating anybody in a meeting. What is your stance on that?
Well, my stance for me is I never humiliate anybody, anytime. And I live by the rules, praise in public, criticize in private. However, don't kid yourself, most styles work unbelievably well. And jobs, obviously we all understand the success. And I tell you, if you wanted to really get crucified by somebody, it was Jack Welch when he ran his quarterly meetings with his companies at GE. And if you had a hole in your armor, he would cut that armor open, he'd reach in, grab your heart, he would squeeze it a couple of times, and he'd either take it out and kill you in that meeting, or he would tell you if you don't get your act together, you're going to be gone later. And so multiple styles work. You and I admire Larry Ellison's After Cats remarkably well. I mean, they are rough and tumble. And so I think multiple styles work, but this is where it goes back to. As you recruit, don't kid yourself what your culture is. And one of the first things I teach the startups is write down the culture, not in sentences and bullets. And everybody who's a hiring leader or interviewing people should recruit on to that. And if people start bringing you people that don't match your culture, don't do it. And don't kid yourself, as an acquisition. If you come into a culture that's dramatically different, you've got a problem. Is anybody from Intel in here?
Intel?
And so I'm going to face this with one of the prior leaders 3 generations ago. And Andy told me, who I'm referring to, he said, John, I said, what do you think about M&A? And he said, John, we just will never be successful at it. And I said, why? He says, we don't accept outsiders, even into our senior ranks, much less with acquisitions. And he said, we will fail at it, and I know we've got to learn how to do it. But the point was, he knew his culture didn't do that well, and he knew it would take a long while to earn, and Intel's getting much better at it, but it was a culture issue. They just didn't accept it. Now let me use culture at the other extreme. An Oracle would do a hostile takeover. I would never acquire a company that the CEO didn't want to be acquired, and I couldn't guarantee the top people hanging with me. And they actually do it well. They've been very successful in it. So back to culture, multiple cultures work, and don't kid yourself. You can't change the culture of the company you acquire or the company you get acquired by. Does that make sense? Thank you.
So John.
And your question was good enough to summarize, but Ben wanted to do another.
So what do you see in the future for Cisco?
Well, one of the things that I believe, when you try to do something that others have failed, you got to do it dramatically better. And there has been a disaster, and you could list 100 high-tech companies who were very good. And when they turned it over for the person who was either the founder or the person that had taken them very small for 10 or 20 years and took them into the future, they almost all either crashed and burned or flatlined and went down. And so when we made our transition back to writing the press release, I wanted to make sure the transition was very, very smooth. And I promised my shareholders when it did occur that it would be smooth. And when I said 2 to 4 years rather than 5 years staying, I meant 2 to 4. And I announced my retirement at the end of the 3rd year. Is we steady provided all these other companies fail. And we said the press release is we want to be the Harvard case study for how we did our transition right. And we didn't use Stanford because they'd accuse us of home cooking and being too nice to us. And so we taught the Harvard case study. And I've been out there twice to teach it. And so we did what most people consider to be one of the smoothest transitions for a company that's been very successful or not. But what we also learned is then you've got to let the new leadership team make the call. Even if you disagree with them, now. And you've got to not be, each time somebody asks you, how did the new leader do, or what'd you think about this quarter, the answer is, I'm not going to comment good or bad. And I had to literally say, it's his company to run, and I had to be able to do it. So I have not commented on Cisco since I left. And I think it's so important because that's what I would like. And for better or worse, it's that leadership team's job to do it. Now, the fun thing is when you're doing startups, I don't lose any sleep at night. And it's like having grandkids. I get them wound up and get excited, and sugar. And then Friday night, I go back to the CEO. This is character building for you. I know it's tough. And then I have the bourbon ginger. So that's a great one, Dan.
So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna give you one of those
He's
items.
serious.
So I think everyone has one, right?